Okay, this is the second of two PowerPoints for our week considering business as community. And the concept of solidarity, I think, is one that we can consider closely. We focus on this, right, because this is a principle that is committed or focused on the relation of one person to others. And also the relation of, say, the enterprise and the community of persons in that enterprise to the broader community, to society. The focus of this principle is on human persons who have a social dimension to them, and so they face particular social imperatives. We'll get into that a little bit. This, of course, affirms that the society is part of human life that preceded the person born into that society, and of course outlasts that person. In that sense, it has persistence, even though the person, of course, with dignity has high priority. And so solidarity regards the ordering and restraint of human to human and group to group interactions. This comes under the area of commutative justice, which kind of references back to the last lecture a little bit. I wanted to focus more on solidarity and commutative justice as it applies to business enterprise. And this notion of solidarity in the teachings of the church has the sort of quality of a response, a kind of a virtue present as the result of the encounter with Christ. Recognition of Christ's teaching here is a love motivation, that we are to love our enemies, which of course, again, harkens back to the topic in the last lecture. And now solidarity, by the way, I'm not sure why the slide did that. The 192, I tried to edit out. I don't know why it came back. All right. It highlights the intrinsic social nature of the human person, right? The equality of all persons in terms of their dignity and rights, and it recognizes the common path of peoples, that a part of our destiny is to be committed towards a kind of a unity. And we see in the document on the vocation of the business leader a reference that, if you weren't watching carefully, has some implications for solidarity, where the advent of communications technology, computers impacting commerce, really shaping human history in new ways, of course, and allowing us to establish relationships in new ways across great distances. From the Compendium on Social Doctrine, the term solidarity is quoted here. It expresses a summary fashion, right? In summary fashion, the kind of composite ties that we have. We're united with each other as persons, and there's also a recognition given to the role of a social group. In terms of the actions that solidarity implies, it starts with the willingness to give oneself for the good of others. It's considered in the Compendium of Social Doctrine to be a moral virtue, an authentic moral virtue. It interacts or interrelates with the commitment we have towards the common good of all as well. All being responsible for all, I think, is a big theme in that. The love motivation, love your enemies, involves the building of community. And of course, Christ's teaching pushes this concept to the love of the stranger and the love of the enemy, because this will help to build society. It'll help us to overcome hatred. Right, that there are, of course, differences that separate persons, but we should be working to recognize those and overcoming them, if possible, where they might divide. A thinker known as Jean-Paul Lederach wrote a book, The Moral Imagination, The Art and Soul of Building Peace, which is kind of an interesting expression of this concept, where he declares that, look, building peace, that when there is conflict, requires, he says, a kind of moral imagination to be nurtured in us. And that imagination is our recognition that we have the capacity to function in a web of relationships in a manner that includes our enemies. We have to imagine that they can be friends. That moral imagination really is a kind of solidarity, put in Lederach's terms. Just have no real comment on this. I found a interesting poem that highlighted the concept of solidarity as a circle. You could, of course, pause and read this on your own if you wanted to, but you note that it's noting that concept of solidarity is kind of rich, and so we need metaphors and similes and so on to try to allow us to root the concept in our imagination. But here it's envisioned as a circle. Now, solidarity fits into the structure of other virtues taught. The common good and the subsidiarity principles sit alongside solidarity. First being that the common good is the relation of one to many. Subsidiarity is about the relation of many to one, and solidarity is the relation of one to another, all being sort of captured in the practices of authentic action. You have the principle of unity in society, which is the focus of the common good, the issue of the articulation of freedom, basically, under subsidiarity, and the principle of our relationships in society is what's going on with solidarity. And the way that these virtues operate, the common good orders and restrains individual attributes. This is under the notion of social justice. Subsidiarity is an ordering and restraint of social attributes and powers, really in the domain of distributive justice. And solidarity, being commutative justice, is ordering and restraining the human-to-human and group-to-group interactions. Now, what's key here is like these principles are presented in the doctrine in balance. And if you put too much emphasis on a particular principle, things will get distorted. So here's a tipped over chair or stool, right? Without solidarity, the common good can be very dehumanizing, where you'll have domination of a particular culture or religion. The common good also will malfunction in a sense without subsidiarity in play. You'll have autocracy and martial law. But now subsidiarity without the common good leads us to anarchy and war. Subsidiarity without solidarity begins to give rise to social privatism. This is where we get the myth of the self-reliant individual, right? That we don't need anyone, which of course is completely false. And solidarity without the common good leads to autocracy and martial law. And without subsidiarity, it leads to sort of a demeaning paternalism where the experts will rule us for our own good. They'll make all the decisions, for instance. And right, we have social justice as a sort of common framework, and then the particular relations between the individuals and society kind of established across these three doctrinal ideas of the common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity. So this little map is just trying to help you to sort of capture the essential features and where the concepts fit in the domain of justice. This is another attempt kind of rooted in the insight from the circle poem. They try to help us understand the relations between the concepts is, I think, sometimes very crucial. And then the circle around the triangle. This is from, it's not exact, but it's from Albino Barrera's texts on the modern Catholic social documents. Basically, these principles are enabling us to put into practice the 4 commands to love. There are different moments in the New Testament where we're commanded to love each other. And each of the social principles is corresponding in theme to one of the 4 injunctions. These are positive dictates of the law of charity. The common good is mentioned when we hear love your neighbor as yourself. And subsidiarity is in the lesson love one another as I have loved you, when the servant washes feet. Solidarity means love your enemies, and human dignity is to love one another without conditions. These are the 4 principles that express the injunctions of the New Testament. And they are fitted together in a balance, right? There's a structure of values where the sort of core value is human dignity. And the 3 legs of the core value are the expressions of freedom, truth, and unity, or justice. Now, when the principles are learned and we exercise the virtues, a good society develops. I think this applies to recognizing the society of persons who are building a community within a business enterprise. The principles are an expression of social arrangements. They, of course, help us to establish an ethical kind of climate in an organization. And here the focus is on, if we're going to be leaders who face ethical challenges, that we have to develop personal and social perfection. We do this with practicing the fundamental principles and exercising the virtues, especially the cardinal virtues. But here we're really focused on the virtue of justice. You do have some challenges, though, of course. The first challenge is understanding who man is in truth and where we fit, right, in nature, and how technology and morality influence personality and personal action, right? This is attitudes that arise in our culture, whereby humans can adopt an understanding of who they think they are, what they're able to accomplish, what they should be. All perennial questions which every culture in history has attempted to address, such as in epic poetry. The second challenge is, right, from the point of view of management, we face diversity in the workplace. And the challenge of pluralism and differences exist at all sorts of levels. Different ways of thinking are out there, and different, say, positions along a political spectrum, different religious affiliation, and of course, cultural attributes. The last challenge is, of course, globalization. And this is a key topic that you see arising with regard to, right, the sort of bonding together of communities across the whole world. Not really simple economic globalization, but really a new era. And the Catholics, the Catholic documents I'm thinking of that mentions this is called the Compendium of Social Doctrine. In section 16, the globalization topic is pretty important in the text. Now, this is a book I did not require. The reason for that is, well, it's not perfectly fitted to what I was trying to do. It's not perfectly accessible as I would have liked. And I mean, it has some good parts, but in other parts, I disagree with some of the ways that the thinkers that built the compendium were trying to interpret social documents. But section 16, I'll expand on it, says, the first of the great challenges facing humanity today is that of the truth of who the being of man really is. The second challenge is found in understanding and the management of pluralism. And the third is globalization. And a little bit later, when the document kind of presents to us on occasion, I should say, this notion of globalization, it missteps. It doesn't get really a lot of clarity in place. So it's a good document to cherry pick sometimes. So here I am cherry picking it. And that's the end of this particular issue, we could say. Let's think of the four principles arranged analytically by what I couldn't use the right words, so I kind of think of a level, I think of maybe area of social reality. So, according to Aquinas, right, we learn that man is a rational animal who lives in tension with his animal nature because he has aspirations for transcendence. So institutions should recognize this duality in us. And every institution that arises has a material and a spiritual element. And there's a sociologist, Talcott Parsons, who takes this view from Aquinas and builds kind of an interesting conceptual framework, looking at the physical and the metaphysical in terms of where human activity can be sort of lined up. And Parsons uses a sort of scaling technique here, moving us from the natural or the physical on up to the metaphysical in a kind of progression. And this is all pursuant of the integration. And Parsons doesn't push it this far, but I think it's a valuable view because of the church's interest in us achieving a particular integration of faith and reason in our human lives, and especially as business leaders. In the physical environment, the social system, according to Parsons, has these four characteristics of adaptation and goal attainment, integration, and latency. And then you see particular responses arise in human society so that the social system is dealing with, in a particular fashion, these characteristics that arise in our physical environment. But then, of course, you see a potential structure of the metaphysical environment. And the Catholic social thought could be layered into this model where moving from the latency mode, which see religious and educational institutions are really dedicated more to the spiritual, to the metaphysical side of things, and moving down, sliding down the scale and up this slide, right, to the physical environment, you have functional imperatives that are established. And now I think that the model is kind of interesting because you can take these Catholic social principles of the common good and subsidiarity and now solidarity, and a lesson kind of spills out of this framework. You know, the solidarity concept, see, I think it aligns pretty well with latency. And it's in terms of the see, judge, act cycle, I think we should give it some prominence in the judgment, the set of principles by which we will judge, in terms of it having a kind of controlling factor. It exhibits a calling to us, in a sense, to be cognizant that our actions are having spiritual impact, even though they appear and on a widespread basis are treated like they're merely operative in a physical environment. So that, you're right, the business functions to impact a person's spirit as well as their physical side, right? And there was, the presentation of these topics in the Vocation of Business Leader, focusing a bit on the issue of adaptation, I think. And so, business enterprises that order operations do so in a manner to create wealth and, of course, to distribute their wealth. And these notions of subsidiarity and solidarity highlight or can serve as controlling virtues in terms of our decisions with regard to operations and distribution of the wealth. And of course, they contribute to the common good, where we have, in all of these elements, there's this sort of interaction, a promotion and furtherance of human dignity. That's the overarching issue, right? Doing things to support dignity, doing things to defend dignity. But now we see it operatively structured according to the legs of the stool, the notions of the exercise of freedom, the recognition of truth about who we are, and right the justice toward others. So that is the second lecture for the week, and we'll stop and put this up.